National exams took place, and U.S. children in reading and math 32-year lows in some of these grades. Why is that? Many people pointing to still recovery from the COVID years of education. But is it more than that? And how do we recover? And what type of commitment do we need to make? Kind enough to join me in my studio is certainly my good friend David James. David, of course, back in 2021, after 30 years with Akron Public Schools, retired from Akron Public Schools, including 13 as the superintendent. He is now the director of the Summit Education Initiative. So, David, when you see those statistics as an educator for most of your life, what's the concern level for you?
I think the big concern is as we, you know, talk locally here about, the economy and jobs, um, poor reading scores can be indicative of what type of life a child will have later on as they grow up. And so we know from our research, poor performers like on the state of Ohio's third grade reading test, if they do poorly on that test, they're going to struggle for the rest of their career. And then it puts, the onus on teachers, unfairly so, I think, to really try to help catch kids up. And many of our teachers do an excellent job of trying to do that, but they still struggle. And so when we look at, these National Assessment of Educational Progress scores, particularly like in fourth grade reading, those scores have been on a downward trend. And then when you look at eighth grade reading scores, it's the same thing. They've been on a downward trend. And so here locally in Summit County, from the data that we track, and it's the state of Ohio tests are totally different than what these national assessment of educational progress tests. But locally here, in fourth grade reading scores have actually increased since COVID, but our eighth grade reading scores have been decreasing since last year. And so those are some issues that I think we need to, that we need to solve. And one potential solution is this whole move across the country, including Ohio, to move to a more, the science of reading. University of Akron has the Center for Structural Literacy, if I'm not mistaken. So we're trying to reform how we teach reading. And going more with the science of reading than some of the methods that we've used in the past. And, I know I'll give a shout out to the staff, LaMonica Davis, the principal at Helen Arnold, because we worked with a group when I was at APS towards the end on a program that actually drastically improved their reading score. So we know that there are options that work that can help kids address reading, and that's a very important aspect to their educational success.
David James is with us. He's the director of the Summit Education Initiative. In talking to some teachers preparing for our conversation this morning, you mentioned maybe changing the way we're teaching a bit. Some teachers that I've talked to, won't name names, have been frustrated with some of the constraints they've been given, David, as far as teaching. And I'm not saying anyone in Akron Public Schools or wherever, but in talking to friends of mine, they're saying it's more now. It's frustrating for them. It's more about getting the kids ready for test scores than it is teaching. And they said they've been teaching for 30, 40 years. And in the last decade, it's been difficult to teach the fundamentals of reading and math. Have you seen that?
No, absolutely. I mean, when you get to a point where, you go to the report years ago, A Nation at Risk, and then all of the rules and regulations that came out, No Child Left Behind, Every Student Succeeds Act, and then we have this high stakes testing, you know, is that really beneficial? Well, I'm sorry, we're looking at data, and it hasn't been because scores haven't been improving. And so we need to take, I think, a little bit different approach. My theory was always, let's get kids interested in coming to school in the first place, making an environment that they want to be in, and I think then learning will thrive. And also, I think we need to give teachers a little bit of autonomy so that, because they're on the front line dealing with students every day, and give them some options that they can be creative and be able to help the kids that they see who are, in dire need of support. So it is this tension between, oh, we have these high stakes tests, and believe me, In the past, as like with our Ohio 8 coalition and meeting in Columbus with legislators or even, past governors, and they talked about no, they just need to meet the metric and you need to figure it out. And we're like, that just doesn't work all the time. So I'm hopeful that moving more to the science of reading might be helpful to our students.
When you talk about the science of reading, I don't want you to get too deep into it here, but for all of us grandparents and parents listening to us this morning, and they're probably saying, yeah, I think we do need to get back to where I learned how to read. What is the simple definition of the science of reading?
It was more about breaking down sentence structure and really understanding the how you pronounce letters and vowels and how you can actually decode words versus looking at a picture in a book and saying you'll see a word and then you'll match it up to like the picture. And so the science, and believe me, I'm no way an expert in that, but when I had took a group to Houston at Houston Independent School District because they were implementing this same program. And so when we were sitting in classrooms, I'm like, I remember that's how I learned how to read, in elementary school. And that was a really long time ago. But, it's like, I think there's a lot of research behind that. And so that's been the push. And I believe it was the state of Mississippi had implemented that early on, and they saw some drastic increases in their reading scores. And so a lot of states around the country have been moving in that direction.
David James is with us. He is the director of the Summit Education Initiative. Many of you remember him, 13 years. He was the superintendent of Akron Public Schools, 30 years in education in the city of Akron. How much does technology play a role in this? Because the kids, I've got two ninth graders, and they spend all day on a screen, and then they come home and they do homework, and a lot of that is on the screen. Eyes getting weary and tired, and I know my one twin, she'll say, gosh, I just don't feel like doing my reading assignment tonight because the eyes are tired from the screen all day. Is that a factor?
I mean, I think that's what we need to reconcile. And I've had to understand that in my own life with, raising our three kids. The technology is very different. We didn't have that, when we were kids. It was always printed books, ink and paper.
Yeah.
And today it's very different. And I think kids, with this digital age that we're in and so much information out there, we have to learn how do we engage kids where they are, not the way we learn, but the way that they're going to have to learn. I think there's a lot of questions around, artificial intelligence. There's just some things that we need to really work through with this so that we make sure we're providing kids the proper tools so they can, further their learning. I've had courses where everything was digital. We have electronic textbooks where other sources that a lot of the things that are in a digital format. We have to come to realize that that's going to be how kids learn, and it has some good options for being able to take a lot of different sources, and bring them in front of kids versus having, you know, um, books everywhere or in print material. So that's something that, the new generations of kids coming up, I think, are exposed to that and are used to it. And yes, you can get, eye strain from looking at a screen all day. But, those are some things. And in some, even with some of our special needs students, who might be visually impaired, it can actually read to them. Or, in the past, we've had things translated into Braille, things like that. So there's just a lot of different needs out there. And we have to be responsive to each individual kid and how they learn in order to promote that learning.
David, obviously, we're not the only two gentlemen in the country right now discussing these with these lower scores. In you being in that arena of education each and every day, what are you hearing as far as possible adjustments? I'm reading some stuff over the weekend preparing for our conversation how many countries have bypassed us in the world of education because the United States has been so geared, and this isn't me, this is what I'm reading, because the United States has been so geared in finances, where The parents, both of them are working. They're not home as much to work with the homework. Some of it is there. I'm a parent. I kind of get that. And then the other part, we were talking about testing. What do we need to do as a society that you think is achievable to maybe turn this around?
Thanks a lot for giving me a hard question. I wish I had the answer to that.
Well, there's probably no easy answer to
there
that.
isn't. I mean, it's just the way you know our society is. There's so many options. You know that we have. It kind of reminds me in 2017. I took a trip to China with some other educators to look at their education system, and it was funny how we were interviewing some students, believe it or not, and they said they wish they had the options like they have in America, like band and orchestra and glee club and things like that. In their school, they really didn't have that option. And so I think, we do have a lot of options, but the big thing is to make sure, because there are plenty of career paths that people can take in life. But, our economy needs people who have much higher levels of training if we're going to, you know, be the first to do certain things that can transform, the world. That takes talent, intellectual talent. And it isn't about, criticizing people who want to be culinary artists, who want to be actors or actresses or musicians. Everyone can't be an engineer or a physicist or whatever, but we need people to be highly educated. And when you look at these reading and math scores, to me, those are, predictor warning signs that we need to do a better job of educating kids. And it's more, I think the other problem we have is we have things in buckets. So we have a pre-K system that's funded separately from like the K through 12 system, which is funded separately from the post-secondary system, both 2-year and 4-year colleges. And we're starting to collaborate more. But I think the biggest boost that we can give our society in terms of education is expanding and giving more options for high quality preschool, because when we look at our kindergarten readiness scores, they have been falling. And so when we look at the kids who enter kindergarten, more than not, they aren't prepared. And we need to improve that. So when we look at kids from ages 3 to 5, we need to do a better job of preparing them for what they're going to see at 6 in kindergarten. And if we look at kindergarten, the better they're prepared there, the better they're going to be prepared for the 3rd grade reading test, 4th grade reading test, 4th grade math. And so I think those are some that we really need to look hard at the education system, because it's basically the same way it's been, for more than 100 years. And I think that needs to change.
I like what you said, build that foundation
Yes,
early to get
absolutely.
that going. The other thing I was wondering, David, is the cost of higher education. When you were at Akron Public Schools, you and I would often talk about the academies and how wonderful they were, because you would sit in that seat and you'd say to me, the idea of education is to prepare these young men and women for the next stage of their life.
Yes.
Some are going to go to vocational school,
Right.
some are going to go to colleges, and some are going to go into the workforce. And you were able to open up through those academies of so many different opportunities. I'm just wondering what you're saying as far as the physicist and life-changing moment in jobs. If some of these families, urban, rural, wherever it might be, are looking at the cost of higher education and saying, we can't do that.
Right.
I don't want that $100,000 debt lying on top of me. Let's go. And there's nothing wrong. I think it's actually smart in today's world to go into a vocational program, to get into electrical, to get into construction, to get into whatever that might be, instead of looking down the road because of the cost of higher education.
No, you're right, and that was one of the reasons why we really expanded, like College Credit Plus dual enrollment courses in the school. So kids, while they're in high school, could take a college level course, get that out of the way, so when they actually went to the university, they cut down their time that they were going to spend at the university and cut down the cost as well. I think the other thing is, like, for instance, in our community, we have to look at, there are probably students who are eligible for Pell Grants who could be successful in college but aren't going, or a trade school, or in a 2-year program. So we have a lot of those options here. The other option is there, one person told me, well, you need to make sure you get out in 4 years because that will, if you don't and you take longer, it'll cut down on your lifetime benefits. Well, I could go and stand in the lottery line and be a millionaire overnight based on chance, or, I might start my own business. There is no, it's not like this, trajectory that's all planned out. Things happen and you change your trajectory. And my thing is, for some of our students, if they get that training while they're in high school, they can actually go into the world of work. They could go to school part-time. They could have tuition reimbursement. There's a lot of things to say about, a career field that can actually help build that ladder to economic mobility. What we're saying is you need some kind of post-secondary education to be successful and to have that economic mobility so you can go buy a house, a car, have a family, pay for diapers, which are really expensive, for baby formula. But it isn't, there are just so many different avenues to get there. And we need to make sure that kids are exposed to that and they're aware. And that was one of the reasons for, our college and career academy program when I was at APS, is to give kids that exposure, because many of our local companies, we're having problems attracting talent. And that is a big issue, for our livelihood, as a community and as a society. And so I think we have to really figure out how we can help kids, work harder, get what they need to know so that they're successful later on in life.
The one thing too, when you go to the academies or a 2-year vocational school, a lot of these companies will hire you and then pay for the next level of education because they want you educated. And as David said, then it gives you the education maybe to open up your own small business, no matter what avenue that might be. Hey, before I let you go, I've mentioned it a number of times, director of the Summit Education Initiative.
Yes.
A lot of people don't know what that is. Talk about what you guys do.
Right. So we're kind of a think tank. We collect data from our public districts in the county and we report it out annually in aggregate. And when we look at that data, we can see trends and things that we can work with the individual school districts to say, hey, you should look at this or you should look at this. Some districts will request, different studies based on their data, like the impact of chronic absenteeism and what it looks like for different segments of their population. We also look at and work with our partners on various research projects, et cetera. So right now, two big things that we're working on is really that whole early learning expansion of high quality pre-K programming in our city and county. And on the other end of the spectrum, working with our local universities and really helping figure out this whole high school to post-secondary transition, whether it's certificate, 2-year, 4-year degrees, and understanding how a student's high school experience impacts their success later on. And there's both academic and non-academic factors that we have to look at to make sure that we're building a profile so universities know what they need to do and our high schools need to know what they can do, so when they make that transition, it's a seamless transition.
Can we go to the web to see a lot of your results and stuff,
absolutely.
David?
There's a dashboard. SEIsummit.org is our website. And at the top menu, it'll like our data. And so there are the educational dashboards. So we'll have everything from pre-K all the way up to high school and then college enrollment and persistence.
Wonderful. Love his passion for education. That's why I invited him in. David, thanks for coming in again this morning.
You're
Good
welcome.
seeing you, my friend.
Thank you. You as well.
There you go. Director of the Summit Education Initiative. David James with us in studio this morning talking a little bit about where we are in this country with education. Traffic.